Okay, so we're going to take a look at OCS, and this is a game system that Patrick really enjoys, and this is his collection, and he's going to talk about a little bit about his games and what his favourites are. So, Patrick, tell us what is the OCS system about?
Okay, so OCS is operational combat series, and it's a operational level game system that's made for playing through probably I would probably call monster level games uh, for the vast majority of them are in the World War II era. It has a supply system, a air system. It's very supply based, so any attack needs to have on map supply. Any movement of units that require fuel uses on map supply. And it's operational level, so most units are battalions, regiments, brigades. Some of the bigger ones have sort of multi-step divisions. And it's a system that's been applied to a wide variety of different World War II conflicts. There's one title in the series that lies outside of World War II, which is Korea, which is the war in Korea in the 50s. So that's probably a brief overview of what Operational Combat Series is about.
Okay, what we'll do now is we'll take a quick look at these games which belong to Patrick, and he can just give us a quick overview of them.
Okay, so this one is Tunisia 2. It's the second edition of Tunisia, which is one of the earlier games in the OCS title. We're actually currently playing through a campaign of this. We're about 2/3 of the way through. We're in March 1943. And it's basically, it's Tunisia in World War II, the British and American invasion of Tunisia, what eventually kicked the Axis out of North Africa, with Americans and British coming through from Algeria after the torch landings from the west towards the east, and eventually Montgomery's 8th Army chasing the back up the coast up north towards Tunis.
Should we spread the map out quickly and have a look?
Yep. This is the map. So as I was saying before, the Americans and the British coming through from here, from the west, and chasing Axis forces, Germans and Italians, up towards Tunis. In the early stages, they have a chance of taking Tunis early, just because of the disparity of force, and then a whole ton of Axis reinforcements come through, and eventually things stabilise. But then the 8th Army comes down here, chasing the Afrika Korps, and usually there's heavy fighting here at the Mareth line, which is where actually New Zealanders were heavily involved in that area, and they chase the Axis up. There's a wide scope for different strategies. It's not scripted. You can within the rules you can do pretty much anything on the map. You can do paradrops. You can send forces on wide outflanking maneuvers as long as you can keep them supplied. In this particular game, it's reasonably low council density for most OCS games, and it's a game where valleys are really important, so it's hard to keep your units supplied out here in the open desert, but you can't form complete front lines. You need to choose choke points to defend, and keep units in reserve to counterattack. Great fun. Well, the first OCS game I played actually, and
so how do you rate Tunisia with compared to your other games, OCS ones?
Oh, it's so hard to rate, but I think this is probably my favourite actually. It's a toss up between this and Burma as to my favourite, just because you've got so many different ways of progressing. You can use your air transports to supply forces at airfields and create threats. You can just build up a sort of a large force and pummel. You've got strategic options. You can use your bombers to bomb Axis ports and limit their supply, or bomb their airfields and try to get air superiority. You've got a game that swings as the reinforcements for the Axis arrive, and where later the Axis supply gets severely restricted. And you've got strong Axis armoured forces. You've got a real difference in the types of forces. So you've got the Allies, which vastly outnumber the Axis, but have lower quality units, and the Axis, vice versa, less units but much higher quality and capable of launching stinging counterattacks.
Okay, let's take a look at your next one.
Right, Burma. Burma is, between this and Tunisia, probably this would be my favourite. This one is the second edition of a game that came out much earlier. It's really different from all the other OCSs. Most other OCSs have open spaces and scope for sort of armoured forces and reasonable counter density. This is very low counter density. It's all fighting in the jungle. You've got very different forces. You've got mules, you've got elephants, you've got low counter density, and you've got to supply some units by air. You've got important airborne operations. It feels really different to the other operational combat series games.
Let's put the maps up.
Yep.
Okay, so here's the map for Burma.
Just if you note the colour here, this gives you an idea of how much use this game has had.
Mm.
That's the original colour of the map, and so it's been out a lot. I've played maybe even I would say 4 full campaigns, depending on whether or not you count early victories as full campaigns. So you can see the primary kind of terrain is rough and jungle. So you have all the drama of the siege of Imphal, with the Japanese making their way through the Naga Hills and cutting off Imphal by cutting off the road between Dimapur and Imphal.
I played this game, and I think there's a video on it, and the battle around Imphal was fantastic. It was just amazing, and that road, as Patrick was saying, trying to hold that road. What a contest that was.
It's really tense and dramatic.
And then we played with the Chindits.
You've got an important airborne operation here with Chindit forces that land over here and harass Japanese supply lines by trying to cut the rail lines. You've got Japanese working their way up the Kobor Death Valley and up here in the west. You've got Chinese-American forces that are pushing down, very strong Chinese-American forces that are pushing down here through near the Mulgong Valley, trying to get to Mityakana and connect the building the Lido Road, which acts a bit like a rail line, and trying to connect it to Mityakana and then down to Bamo. You've got Allied forces which are really dependent on supply and need to have supply lines, or if not supply lines, be supplied by air consistently, whereas you've got Japanese that are excellent foragers and you can send them out and without worrying too much about supply on raiding operations. You've got an Allied Air Force which is supreme and is necessary and can be used to do airborne operations. It's a fantastic game. There's so much you can do with this. You've got so much scope for strategic options as either side. You've got a real asymmetry in each side and how they're played. Absolutely fantastic.
Yep.
I think we should play it sometime.
Yeah,
just talking about it makes me want to play it.
It was a great experience, I've got to say.
The other thing you can notice here, the colours of where units have been stationed, because they've protected the underlying colour from the sunlight. So you can see where the concentration of forces were just by looking at the colour of the map.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to our next one.
Right, Baltic Gap. I've never played a full campaign of this. This is a lot more like your classic OCS. Eastern Front was OCS's main type of main area of operations it was interested in, and especially in the earlier titles. And as you can see, large counter density, huge units, divisions. So let's have a look at the map.
I think Patrick and I played one small scenario once, didn't we? Of this?
Yeah, I think we did.
And even on that small scenario, one sort of small corner of the map, the number of units was phenomenal.
So if you're not used to it, just dealing with the large counter density is quite daunting, just mechanically. But if you do get used to it, it's a fantastic experience. So the Soviets start over here with huge numbers of forces and are trying to make their way westwards. And the Germans have a very strong port here at Riga, which usually they can hold on to. It recreates the situation with the Baltic Gap. Soviet forces, as they've got to convert rail, and they've got a schedule, so they have to be able to take these population centres within a certain amount of time. Otherwise, Stalin's not going to be happy and is going to fire you. What's really interesting is as they get to here, there's no easy way to supply this area, and there's no easy way to form solid lines. There's nothing to anchor them on. So here becomes a rolling battle of armoured forces to and fro that counter clash. Whereas over here, it's more classic lines that progress through the main axes. I'd love to play a campaign of this, but it's one of those games which are borderline unplayable unless you have people that are committed and are willing to spend a lot of time on. So what were you asking?
So how many of these scenarios have you actually played with this one?
I've tried to play through what's called the September campaign, which I think is 12 turns, and we were insanely optimistic back in those days, and we had a weekend, and I think we got through 2 turns.
Okay.
And I've played twice the smallest scenario, which I think is just this part of the map, which is Polotsk.
And that's the one I played with you, I think.
Yeah, that's a 2-turn.
Yeah, so you're talking this little area here,
Yeah.
and
it takes about an evening to play, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the density of the counters was insane just for that area.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Okay, so that's Baltic Gap.
Right. Reluctant Enemies. Reluctant Enemies is one of the newest OCS titles. It's about the Operation Exporter, the invasion of Lebanon and Syria by Commonwealth forces to oust the Vichy French. They were, I think, potentially threatening their supply lines, especially if they got reinforced by the Germans. One of the titles which is much more approachable, good for people that want to get into the series. Good learning game because there's very low counter density, as you can see. This is the full extent of the counters in the game, which is
not many. No.
Incredibly small for an OCS game, and it's a single mapper as well. So very small.
Let's take a look at it. Yeah.
I think there is a large number of turns though. It's like 40 turns, but 40 turns on a single map with low counters is quite manageable. You're still setting this up over multiple nights. You're not going to play this in a single night.
Take us through the map, Patrick.
So you have here Palestine. You have Commonwealth forces starting down here in the south towards Transjordan and Haifa. A strong Commonwealth force trying to work their way up the coast. Some reasonably strong French forces with some armoured ability to launch armoured counterattacks. The second main axis of advance is here through the Bekaa Valley, a bit rougher, more infantry. And then there's this rail line up towards Damascus, so you get the Commonwealth working their way up to Damascus, although very open, so prone to raids along this track, so counterattacks.
Playing the campaign, what's the initial front lines? How do they look?
I think the Commonwealth start here, here, and here, and the French aren't meeting them there. They've got sort of forces here, here, and maybe here.
And how does a sort of campaign sort of play out in terms of the movement of forces? Do the French come down, or
no? It's definitely the French are on the fence, although they have some scope, especially to do some counterattacks over here in the open areas. But they're looking to slow the Commonwealth down it's the onus is on the Commonwealth to push up and take Beirut. Or
So this is all desert, obviously, through Syria here.
Yeah.
So how does that affect gameplay, the desert?
it's really open terrain, so you're very vulnerable. Any units sitting in open terrain are very vulnerable to armoured forces for a start. Because that it doesn't constrict movement, you can't easily form solid lines, so you can't rely on protecting your rear by just creating solid lines. You have to have sort of strong forces and reserves and garrison your supply dumps and junctions. Whereas over here, where it's much tighter, much more constrained, you can, for example, here this is impassable, so the French can just plonk units here and just keep a solid, continuous line of defence and potentially even fortify it.
So
Artillery is really important too, especially
Okay.
in a game like this with solid supply lines. OCS is a system where you can keep artillery in reserve and respond to attacks by barraging units that are about to attack.
So this is probably one of the more realistic operational level games, isn't it?
What do you mean by realistic?
Well, you've got supply, you've got air, you've got
I mean the
artillery,
system,
the
not
system,
reluctant enemies.
yeah, the system itself.
Yeah, and there's always a debate about realism, and you know, any war game, of course, is not a one-to-one recreation of reality. Inevitably, there are abstractions, but the designers are trying to represent some aspect of operational planning and warfare, and in that I think they've succeeded quite well. And there's definitely things where they've had to make design decisions which mean that some things are less realistic than
But
otherwise would
certainly compared to other games, this is probably up there in terms of it models as much as possible, doesn't it? Really.
There are games that are even more but this is on a sliding scale. This is definitely on the end of trying to be realistic, and it gives you, I think it does give you a real sense of the kind of decisions and the kind of maneuvers that an operational level commander has to make in this kind of warfare.
So how do you rate reluctant enemies compared to Baltic Gap, Burma, and Tunisia?
I think I'm not. I think this is probably lower down. I still really like it, but I don't think it's as good as those ones. Even taking into account the fact that it's more approachable. However, for a new OCS player, this is the one I would go to first, just because it's so easy to pull out. It's not a huge time investment, and easy to manage.
Okay, great, and we'll go on to the last one.
Okay, so Sicily 2. Now this, I can't say it's the second edition of the original Sicily. There is an original Sicily, but it was a 2-mapper. So they took Sicily and they turned it into a 1-map. I think this is the regular scale for OCS. Obviously, Campaign for Sicily in 1943, the Allied amphibious landing, and the subsequent operations to kick the Germans out and back over into Italy, all the way up to Messina. I think out of this one and Reluctant Enemies, comparing 1-mappers, this would be my favourite of the two. But there's a bit more chrome. You've got naval rules, so if you're learning an entire system, you've got that on top of the regular rules to absorb. But boy, is it fun! Just having, for a start, there's no edge of the world issues, and invading an island, working your way from the beaches and up through the rough terrain, having the scope to do other amphibious landings, roughly, at least at the start, equivalent air forces, so you've got a really interesting air war layer on top of everything else. You've got the ability to bomb ports, you've got German divisions and Italian divisions that are interesting. Another thing I should say, actually, just generally about the OCS series, is it's incredibly well researched. Every single game, a huge amount of work goes into researching the entire order of battle. the maps, the critical flow of what happened originally in the campaign. You get that from reading the rules of the game. Very faithful to the history. And this one plays in, I think, 14 turns. So a single mapper, 14 turns actually, in some ways more approachable than Reluctant Enemies because it's shorter.
How did this game come? And
this game is in a different format from all the other OCSs. So they released it as a I don't know if you could call this a magazine game, but they released it as part of this Operational Matters magazine, which is a magazine full of OCS articles, sort of partially aimed, not just for beginners, but great for beginners because it gives you some background and some really good strategy tips, which you can't really find in any other OCS printed material. It's got, I think it's got an article about every single major OCS release. Couple of the articles are written by personal friends of mine. One of them is by Thomas, who I play with every week. Another one is by Mark Milke, who's this guy here, who came up recently from Christchurch to play Napoleon's Triumph with us, actually. Great guy. So two of the main contributors to the magazine are in New Zealand, which is a lot for New Zealand as OCS hub, even though it's very much an American game, and the vast majority of the community are in the States. So this didn't come in a box. There was no box, and hence why I started painting the box for it out of an old game that I was no longer using, intending to maybe print something to show Sicily.
So do you have any other games on pre-order, or is that it for OCS?
Yes, I do have one other game on pre-order for OCS, and shame on me, I've forgotten its title, but I know what it is. It's a single mapper set in the Russian front, and it's the operation towards taking Moscow in 1941. So it's another one. What I'm excited about in that one is it's another very manageable game in that it's a single map of 14 turns, so not too monsterish, and yet it's Eastern Front, which I don't have. As you can see, the only Eastern Front game I have is Baltic Gap, so I'm really looking forward to that one.
And it only remains to be asked, have you played Case Blue?
No, I have not played Case Blue, and I think Case Blue may even be too much of a stretch for myself, despite the fact that I'm willing to take on big games.
Okay,
a bridge too far, possibly.
Okay, so that's Patrick's OCS collection and his thoughts on the game. Thanks for watching, and catch you next time.